I want to get right into the study because we've got so much to cover. This study of Colossians will take us through about 8 weeks, if we can stay together that long. There are 4 chapters, and we'll try to do a half chapter each Wednesday, if we possibly can. So I want you to open your Bibles to the book of Colossians. Get your notebooks out and your pens and start writing from the very beginning. I will spend most of the time tonight talking about the introduction to the study. We won't get to many verses tonight. But in any study of any book in the Bible, you need the background information in order to understand the text. So I try to give you a background of information that you will use through the entire study. You have to do that with every book in the Bible. You see, we could just open to Colossians and I could start with the first verse tonight. And I could do that. But you would not know the background out of which it all came. I would know it because I've studied it so many times. But you would not have that in your mind. And so it would be scripture, yes. But it would not be out of the setting that Paul placed it in when he wrote the book. So, let's talk about Colossae. Bob told me where to find this map, and it was exactly where he said it was. So Parker and I went back there and got it. Will this raise up, Parker? Does this come up any? A little bit. You may have this same map in the back of your Bible. But let's look at this one together. This is a map of Paul's missionary journeys. This is where he spent those 30 years preaching the gospel, organizing churches, and spreading the Lord's word and work throughout the Roman Empire. This is Italy, Rome, the westernmost point of his ministry. It extends all the way over into the East countries. Here is Jerusalem, the land of Israel, right there. Here is the location of Damascus, right about where the word Syria is. That's where Paul was converted. Then he went back down to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem back to Antioch, which is right there. When Barnabas was sent by the church to Antioch, he saw what a big job it was going to be. So he sent for Saul of Tarsus and brought him over to Antioch. And it was at Antioch that Paul was called into the Lord's service to spread the gospel, and his partner, what was his name? Paul and Barnabas. Okay? He went on 3 journeys over this area. He didn't get to Rome until last of all, where he was imprisoned and later lost his life. But his 3 journeys covered this area right here. One of the places where he spent the most time was the city of Ephesus. And Ephesus is right there. Right there. It is located in what is now present-day Turkey. If you fix that in your mind. Paul spent a total of about 3.5 years in Ephesus. It was sort of the capital of Asia Minor. He preached the gospel for 3.5 years in Ephesus. He also visited any number of these places scattered around on his journeys. There were a couple of places mentioned in the New Testament that he didn't visit. As far as we can tell, he never went to Colossae, where this letter that we're going to study was sent. He never got there. The reason we can say that is because in Luke's outline of his ministry in the book of Acts, he tells us where Paul went, but he never mentioned Colossae. Another reason we can think that and believe that it's true is because Paul said he never went there. I guess he knew. So. But while he was at Ephesus, people came from these towns and cities all over to hear him preach. It would be like Billy Graham coming to Nolensville, and all the people from all around would come in here to hear him. Okay? So people came from different places all around while he was at Ephesus to hear him preach. Some would come on business journeys to the big city of Ephesus. Now you remember we just studied the book of 1 John. And that's where John was pastor later on. The city of Ephesus. Okay? When Paul was there, some people came from Colossae, either on business and heard him preach, or came specifically to hear him preach. Now, I'm sure your eyesight is much better than mine, and maybe you can see this. From Ephesus, there is a river that goes right there. And it's called the Lycus, L-Y-C-U-S, the Lycus River. If you went up that river from Ephesus 100 miles, you would come to Colossae. There were 2 other cities nearby. You need this in your notes. The city of Laodicea and the city of Hierapolis, H-E-I-R-A-P-O-L-I-S, Hierapolis. So, there were people from Hierapolis, from Laodicea, and from Colossae that came to Ephesus, heard Paul preach, And some of them got converted. And two of them you know pretty well. Epaphras. Put that down. E-P-A-P-R-A-S. Epaphras. E-P-A-P-H-R-A-S. The second one was a man by the name of Philemon. Now, they both lived in Colossae. They both were converted under Paul's preaching. And when they went back to Colossae, up the river, 100 miles, they took the gospel back to their families and their friends, and led many of them to Christ. And when that happened, the next thing logically to happen, they organized a church. There was a church at Colossae, started by Epaphras and Philemon. And there was a church at Laodicea, and probably started by the same two men. We do not know of a church at Hierapolis. When you went up that river 100 miles, on this side of the river was Laodicea. And across the river, right straight across, was Hierapolis. You go up the river about 5 miles, and you come to Colossae. So the three cities were within 5 miles of each other. But that's how the church came about at Colossae. Through Epaphras and Philemon, who were converted in Ephesus and took the gospel back to their home. Okay. Locate this map, not now, but in the back of your Bible, you will find a series of maps, and this map will be there. And you can review it up close. Okay? Now, I want you to look at Acts chapter 19. These two chapters, Acts 19 and 20, tell us about Paul's ministry in Ephesus. I'm not going to read all of the chapters, but I want you to. But I want you to look at verse 10 of the 19th chapter of Acts. And this continued by the space of 2 years, that is Paul's ministry in Ephesus. Later on, he came back and spent another year and a half. And now notice the next statement. So that all they which dwelt in Asia heard the word of the Lord Jesus, both Jews and Gentiles. That's how we know that the gospel was spread by people who came from all over, heard Paul, got saved, and took the message back to their homes. Okay? Acts 19:10. Okay? We know that the church was begun out of that kind of scenario. Okay? Two features about the book of Acts that you want to take note of. One is Paul never went there. Look at chapter 2 of Colossians and verse 1. Well, it was in my Bible today. Let's see. Oh, it's still here. Chapter 2, verse 1. For I would that you know what great conflict I have for you, talking to the church members, and for them at Laodicea, there's that town, and for as many as have not seen my face in the flesh. So Paul said, I was never there. They've never seen my face. The other unique thing about this letter you will find in chapter 4. Please turn there. Cole, turn this up just a little bit. Give me a little more volume. Chapter 4, verse 13. For I bear him record that he hath a great conflict for you, and them that are in Laodicea, and them in Hierapolis. That is, the three towns. Colossae, Hierapolis, and Laodicea. Now look at verse 18. The salutation by the hand of me, Paul. Paul wrote this book in his own handwriting. No other book that he wrote does he say that. But here he says that. So, those two unique features. He was writing to a church he'd never seen, never been to, never preached for, and he wrote it in his own handwriting and sent it to them. Now I want to tell you a little bit about the town of Colossae. It probably was third in size to the other two. Laodicea probably was the largest, then Hierapolis, and then Colossae. There are ruins that you can see today of Hierapolis and of Laodicea, but there is nothing at Colossae. We do know by history that an earthquake came along about this time, and Colossae was completely destroyed. So the church that was there when Paul wrote to them did not stand very long because the town was completely destroyed. But let me tell you something about that letter, which we're going to study for 8 weeks. And I'm telling you, folks, it is one of the most exciting studies you'll ever be involved in. And if you have to miss a Wednesday night, I'm going to feel sorry for you. There is no other book like this book. It is a wonderful book. Okay. Some Bible scholars say it's the greatest book ever written. And it certainly is the greatest book ever written on the person of Jesus Christ. No other book has ever come close to it. Now, when Epaphras took the gospel back, along with Philemon, won some family members and friends to Christ, they established the church. I call it the First Baptist Church of Colossae, but whatever. And I want to tell you where it met. Hold your place there and turn over a few pages to the book of Philemon, just before the book of Hebrews. You remember Paul wrote a letter to Philemon about his slave Onesimus. Look at verse 1 and verse 2. Paul, a prisoner of Jesus Christ, and Timothy, our brother, unto Philemon, our dearly beloved and fellow laborer, and to our beloved Apphia, and that's probably Philemon's wife, and Archippus, our fellow soldiers, that's probably Philemon's son. But notice the next phrase. And to the church that meets in your house. So this church that they organized back in their hometown didn't have a nice building like this. They met in the home of Philemon. Philemon was a very wealthy man and was converted under Paul's preaching and became a friend for life. And it is a good thing to read the book of Philemon along with the book of Colossians, because he wrote both of them at the same time and sent them back to Colossae. 3 men that you want to keep in mind throughout the study, besides Paul, are the 3 that I've mentioned: Epaphras, Philemon, and Onesimus, his slave that ran away, you remember, and was converted when he got to Rome and visited Paul. Let's interrupt now our look at the history and think about this for a minute. It doesn't require an apostle for a new church to be started. Epaphras was just a man from Colossae, but he started a church. God uses people in the spread of the gospel and in his work. And Epaphras and Philemon are 2 great examples for us. I've always been interested in how churches got started. I've questioned Parker 100 times about how this church got started. When I was in the office, one of my responsibilities was leading the association to establish new churches. And in those 14 years, we started a lot of them. I could stand here tonight and tell you about them, how we started the church here or there, yonder. That's always been of great interest to me. I like the history of churches. So we understand now how the church at Colossae got started. But now I want to tell you what brought about the letter. I'm glad you asked about that. I like it when you ask questions like that. Why did Paul write to them? What was the occasion that brought about the letter of Colossians. Well, here's the story. Do you remember when we studied 1 John, I told you about the false teachers that came in and sought to undermine John's work at Ephesus? The same group went to Colossae. And they sought to undermine the work of Epaphras and Philemon in that little church. They were called Gnostics. They majored on knowledge. We know it all. You've heard people described as a know-it-all. Well, that's a Gnostic. They were totally committed to destroying the work of the Apostle Paul, as they were the work of the Apostle John. So they went to Colossae, and they dug their heels in, and they did it under the guise of saying to the people, Paul didn't tell you enough. He preached what he calls the gospel, but he only told you part of the story. We have come to tell you the rest of the story. And what they taught folks was crazy. It was false teaching par excellence. And it was made up of a lot of different things. Jewish legalism, the laws of the Jewish people. Oriental philosophy. Pagan astrology. Mysticism. Asceticism. Superstition, and a little touch of Christianity. They amalgamated all of this into a new religion. And they came in and told the people, we're not opposed to Christianity. We're just trying to lift it up to where it ought to be. And they spoke about angels and the heavenly bodies and how the lining up of certain heavenly bodies controlled events on the earth. And all of it was presided over by some kind of angelic beings. And Jesus was just one of them. He was a good man, but he was not what Paul told you. He was just another one of the emanations from God, like these angelic beings that control the heavenly bodies. And they tried to, the person of Jesus. They said to the people, you need more than Jesus. You need knowledge and understanding of how all these heavenly bodies, under the control of angelic beings, control your life and the whole world below. So they were taking out of the Christian church the Lord Jesus Christ and replacing him with angelic beings. So Epaphras, out of his concern for what was happening to his church, said one night to his wife, I'm going to go talk to the Apostle Paul and get some help. And when he started looking for him, he found out that Paul was by this time in Rome, in prison. So he got on a ship and went to Rome and found Paul in prison. And he told him what was happening in Colossae by these false teachers. You said, Brother Carl, where'd you get all that? Right out of the book of Colossians, and as we go along, I'll be pointing it out to you. We know that's what happened. So Epaphras has gone to Rome, visited with Paul, told him all about the problems, and he was arrested for being a friend of Paul and put in jail at the same place where Paul was. But when he shared all this with Paul, out of his great heart and the leadership of the Holy Spirit, Paul sat down and wrote them a handwritten letter. And that's the book of Colossians. And what he's doing in the letter is refuting the false teachers and the doctrines that they were promoting, and showing the Christians in Colossae, as he will show to us, that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and if you have him, you have all you need for this life and for heaven. So what is the theme of the book of Colossians? I'm glad you asked. Be sure you write this down. The preeminence of Jesus Christ. And it is in direct opposition to the false teachings of the false teachers who said that Jesus was just another angelic being, and he couldn't be the Son of God because he was a man walking about in human flesh. That made Paul so mad that they would even dare to bring Jesus down and say that he was not the Son of God. So in every chapter, he's going to elevate the person of Jesus. And the theme of the book is the preeminence of Christ. Back to one thing about the false teachers, and it is their emphasis on astrology. And those of you who can't wait to get the paper to read your horoscope, you better be careful. That's where it came from. It is the aligning of certain heavenly bodies that controls the events of your life. And that was the teaching of the Gnostics. I don't read the horoscope. I read this. Okay. Whew. You had to have all that information or you wouldn't understand the book. So when Paul got this word, his heart was so moved, he wrote this letter. Let's look at the first two verses. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, by the will of God. The false teacher said Paul was a fake. He claimed to be something that he wasn't. And he told you that he was preaching the whole truth, but he only told you part of the truth. From the very outset of his letter, he wants them to understand, I am an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God. And that's enough. And when they read the first word of the letter, it would have pricked their minds and their hearts. For he starts it off, Paul. I am an apostle, and it is because of the will of God. And Timothy, our brother, to the saints and faithful brethren in Christ, which are at Colossae, grace be unto you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Paul could put more in one verse. He put so many thoughts in those two verses. He identified himself, and then he identified the people he was writing to, and he called them by two names, saints and faithful brothers in the Lord. Can you think of two titles more precious and meaningful than that? But who is a saint? Is a saint somebody that has been so deified that he is crowned a saint and put in a stained glass window in some temple somewhere? No, every Christian is a saint. You've heard people say, I'm no saint. Well, you better be. Because to the New Testament, every born-again believer is a saint. I will talk about the meaning of that term next Wednesday night. He also called them faithful brothers in Jesus Christ. They were his brothers and sisters in the Lord, and they were saints to God. Now he's going to enter into the body of his message to them in these wonderful 4 chapters. And I'm telling you, folks, you will be blessed. It is such a wonderful book as he elevates the person of the Lord Jesus Christ, without whom there is no saint and there is no faithful brother. Don't miss next Wednesday night. Read through the first chapter, and you will begin to get the drift of Paul's message. And by the time he gets through, your heart's going to sing, and your feet will be sore. What a great book. What a great book. And I can't say enough about it. I'm just so thankful that I'm going to have the privilege of studying it with you.